What's up, gang? Richie here. Welcome to another episode of The Flip Side with Richie Flip. For this particular chat, we're going to talk about family. Family can mean a whole lot of different things to a whole lot of different people. What I wanted to talk to you about, especially if you're my age, again, when we talk about me being in my early 50s, you seem to see things differently. So we're going to talk about an aspect of family that if you don't really I don't say address, I guess address is probably the way to describe it. If you don't do it now or you do it soon, it might be too late to do so. So let's get into this one. I'll explain why. So what does family mean? Well, family, like I said, means a whole lot of different things to different people. What I want to discuss here in this particular family topic is just knowing where you came from. What do I mean by that? Well, we're kind of getting to that part of our lives, whether you're my age or maybe even younger, where you might be running out of options or opportunity to just find out where it is you really came from. My generation behind me, obviously, our kids, and then our grandkids, and then even maybe our parents to an extent. My parents were the baby boomer era. You don't really know maybe where people have come from as far as your heritage. With my mom, it was the former like Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Poland, a little bit of Russia. And unfortunately, there just wasn't a whole lot of information. Even though I've asked her, I've asked my aunt, a lot of folks just didn't keep that info handy. And had I asked these questions sooner with my grandparents, I would have gotten probably some good information. Thankfully, that's a shame, but thankfully on my father's side, I was able to find a whole lot of information just with where my family came from Italy. It was actually from Sicily, just outside of Palermo, Gelati Siculo, is where they came from, which is, I think, just southeast of Palermo, as I mentioned. So, I was able to I did this about 25 years ago. It's going on now. I just decided, let me just try to find some things out. You really didn't have the internet as a tool like it is today, so you had to ask questions. That was key. Having family members still around to ask those questions and hopefully get some answers. So that's one of the things I want to stress. If you do have an interest in knowing family history, the lineage, you've got to start asking questions to the folks that, might know more than other people, the ones that have been around for a long time. Not that it's a difficult question to ask, but they just kind of know things that maybe you would have no idea about, things they probably haven't remembered in years. That was what happened with when I sat down with my aunt, my father's sister. She was a few years older than him, I think about 3 years. Unfortunately, both have gone. My aunt went, I forget, it might have been 7 years ago, 8 years ago now. And then my father, we're coming up on, it'll be 5 years this coming November. But I remember setting up, a date to meet my aunt at the house over in Clifton, right where we, grew up, basically that neighborhood, and just to say, hey, I wanted to talk to you about the family history. What can you tell me? And we sat down, and I had a notebook, just like this, and actually in the closet behind me here, if you can see it, if you're watching the podcast, I have an accordion folder type of briefcase. It's plastic, it's cheap, but just so much stuff I have in there because, number one, there was a notebook, right? And I started writing things down. I asked my aunt, where do we come from? Who was in the family? Because you see photos maybe of the older generation, the folks you had no idea who they are, and it was just a good starting point, right? So I found out that, I kind of knew certain things, and then other things it was all brand new. Even eventually talking to my father about this, he had no clue on some of this as far as what I had told him, what my aunt had told me, what another cousin had told my aunt when I was there. We made a phone call. But, I was able to find out my grandfather's side from Sicily, there was 5 siblings. 3 of the 5 were born in Italy. The other 2 were born in New York City and then ended up in North Jersey. And for my grandmother, all 5 were born in Sicily. It was funny. My grandparents grew up, or at least the families, were in the same town in Sicily, but never met at all until they were in the States, which is crazy to believe. But I was able to find out these little things. Okay, 5 here, 5 there. And then I found out, because again, the way all the families kind of live together in certain areas, that 2 of the brothers on my father's side married two of the sisters on my grandmother's side. So it was certainly a large family at that point. But again, these are things I didn't know. I started to figure out, through these conversations, all the kids had, or all the, all the, my relatives had the Italian name. It was Giacomo. It was Bartolo. My grandfather was Francis for Frank. There was always this one uncle of mine, though. He was Uncle Harry. And it just never seemed to fit. All these other names, even though they Americanized their names. And that's the other thing you're going to have to just kind of understand that. Back in, again, my great grandfather came over in the early 1900s. I think it was 1900 he came over. And I found a lot of this out as far as the dates when doing some research on Ellis Island on that website. I think it was ellisisland.org, if it's still the same. And I did a lot of this research in spurts. I would do something, and then I would kind of just run out of steam, and eventually I would come back and do it again. But you find out all these other things. And again, especially a lot of the Italians, my family, and I'm sure other families, would Americanize the name. So Giacomo was James. My grandfather Francis was Frank, and then one of the younger brothers, Bartolo, was Tom, and then I'm just trying to think who else was in there. That was probably the ones that came to mind, at least on my father's side. And why did they Americanize the names? They didn't want to have the Italian. Some might call it a stigma. A lot of us these days, we're very proud of our heritage. It just wasn't the case back then for a lot of this. It was they wanted to Americanize everything, even to the point where they would spell the last name differently to not make it not look like an Italian name. But again, going back to my uncle Harry, it just didn't seem right. And I kind of had done a little bit of research on ellisisland.org, I think, first, because this is how it came about. And I went to my aunt saying, all right, but who's this Mario guy? I was assuming it was Mario because when you do the research over at Ellis Island, like I did online, you can get the manifest from, if you can find out when they came over, you could actually see the manifests from, I think it was about a 3-week journey from Sicily to New York, to Ellis Island, to the Statue of Liberty. That was how they came over. And you could see when they were, it was all handwritten, and I guess it looked like a Mario. They couldn't quite figure it out, so I guess when I did it online, when they digitized everything, it was MA ... O or something like that. And I go, but Aunt Terry, who's Mario? And she's like, there's no Mario. There's nobody there. I go, what? But was that Uncle Harry? And you start having these conversations, and they started to wonder, well, what's this all about? So it's all about having these conversations with your family members to find out the things maybe nobody knew about, or maybe one person knew about, and that was the case here. My aunt called one of her cousins, who actually, again, if we're doing the lineage here, her father, my aunt, her father was my grandfather Frank, and then she had called one of the daughters of Giacomo, who was James, and actually Purple Heart recipient too, which I found out. But she goes, Thelma, what's this all about here? And she said, no, Harry's real name was Morrow. And nobody knew that, which I thought was kind of cool when I got to go tell my father this, when my aunt found out. So really it was that point I kind of became the family historian, which I still do. I'm still looking for things every once in a while, but that's kind of where it all started for me. And this is what I'm trying to tell you, is that do it now before it's too late. We're kind of getting to a point in time where I don't think many people are interested in where the family might have come from. You might have some pictures, you might have some other things, but it comes down to the folks that are still alive, where you can talk to them and have a conversation and find these things out. So when I told my father, he was blown away, because no one knew that Uncle Harry's real name was Morrow. They always knew him as Uncle Harry. Why the change? This was a big deal for the family. And again, we're kind of assuming here with this. Uncle Harry was the first of that family to go to college. Went to Springfield College in Massachusetts, from what I could tell. And I believe he met his wife there, his future wife, Aunt Elsie. What does this all mean? Doesn't mean anything, right? Well, Aunt Elsie was from Mississippi. And back in those days, the idea, it's a terrible thing to say, but the idea with certain people and certain groups was that an Italian from New York being in love with, a woman from Mississippi and eventually marrying just was unheard of. So what he did was he changed his name. He changed it legally to Harry Phillips. And that was how he got around, I'm assuming, her parents, as far as having that conversation. Hey, what's your name? Harry Phillips, instead of the full Italian name. And you'll see that if you do some research, if you have the Italian heritage like I do, especially in the Northeast. A lot of families, a lot of individuals would change their last name so that way it didn't have the Italian connotation. Good, bad, indifferent. I think that was just kind of part of life back then. So we're only assuming that's how and why he did this. But again, you start finding all these things out. I mean, I kind of went down this road of, okay, we know who they are now. We know they're all gone. The only person in that group I actually got to meet on my father's side was Uncle Harry. I was 10 years old when he passed away. Everybody else had died previously. On my grandmother's side, I knew my grandmother. And I believe I had known one or two of her brothers, again, even on that side, everything was Americanized. You had Vincenzo, which was Jimmy, and then you had Natal, which was for Neil. There was another one in there. I can't remember what it was now, but you get the point, right? So it was all that just become Americanized, and that's how people, eventually knew them as far as Jimmy or James or Neil. The Italian piece of it went away for quite a while. Even when I've gone to the grave sites to see where they've been buried, to pay my respects over the years, it's all the Americanized names. James, Neil, Jimmy, James. It's just how it went back then. So, but again, these are all things that if you have an interest in knowing about your family history, to get out there and take a look at these things. It gets harder and harder every day. Now, harder and harder, but also maybe it's easier and easier by using the internet for certain things to find things out. I was able, just because another relative who I found out through all this, who reached out to me out of the blue, because I had been doing some research from the Rochester area. And that's the one other thing I had figured out. My grandfather had, it was a lot of brothers and sisters. That's how it went back then. My grandfather came to New York. One of my uncles came to New York as well, but ended up in Rochester. Same last name, but they spelled it differently, right? So pronounced the same way. So, and it was just these hunts I went on to find different things and just kind of see what I could find out. I mean, there's things you can find out online. Ellis Island is a great way to go. You can get pictures of the ship that they came in over, as long as you kind of know your details. And it's very possible now you can find more stuff online. It's just hard. But the one relative I told you about, I can't read or write Italian, can't speak it, but she showed me how to look for certain things, and I was able. I think it was through the Mormon Church over in Salt Lake City, where they had a database of birth certificates that you can go through online, and I was able to find out when they were all born, where they were born. I was able to find out the addresses that they lived in over in Sicily. So it's very cool to find these things out. Now, this is just kind of a drop in the bucket. There are other things that you could be doing. But the whole point of this message to you is just to get out there and do it. Talk to people, have these conversations, take notes down, write things down. Because what you're going to gather is going to be helpful for the future generations to come to know. Because eventually, no one's going to know, and I don't think anybody's going to really care, which is a shame. So, let's give that some thought. And if you have an interest in it, reach out to me too. I can kind of give you some pointers on what works for me. But, it's just an idea to kind of get you down that road if you want to find out more about your family and how it can really change your life, I think, in a way. So we got that. Here comes the music. Right, there it is. That means we're going to the flip side. We're going to keep on the subject of family, but we're going to turn it to a musical concept. Musical, not going to, no show tunes, right? No, but in terms of music. If you think of music, you could think of plenty of bands that have, family, brothers and sisters, cousins. I mean, think of it. You got the Beach Boys with the Wilson brothers, right? Brian, Carl, Dennis, AC/DC, the Young Brothers. There's so many I'm drawing a blank right now on, but Allman Brothers, Jackson 5, and the list goes on and on. Did I mention the Black Crowes with the Robinson Brothers? So, and again, I got a list here, but it's like, I can give you more of these, but the more I give you, it's like the more we could probably all think of here, right? Even with the Beach Boys, Mike Love was a cousin of the brothers, so that's all family. The Bee Gees, right? 3 brothers Gibb. The Kinks, the Carpenters, In Excess, right? I think it was 3 brothers for In Excess. So you kind of, and the Jonas Brothers, a lot of brothers here, so you kind of get the gist. A lot of family within music. But there was one band with 2 brothers that changed my life forever. And I think you might be able to guess this. 2 brothers and their family who immigrated here from the Netherlands. And if you don't know it by now, I'll tell you, it was the Van Halen brothers, Eddie and Alex Van Halen, who put together one of the most influential rock bands of all time. And just like a family, ups and downs, good times, bad times, and it's unfortunate the way things kind of unfolded for this band and how it came to an end. But again, we talk about family, we talk about families everywhere almost. That was one of the most influential bands for me ever, because I always wanted to learn how to play the guitar, and I did, and I play in a band right now. But when I really was able to figure out, number one, how to play the guitar, and then realize what Eddie Van Halen was doing, I was like, yep, I'm done with that. I'm not going to learn how to play the guitar like him. It makes 0 sense because I'll never be able to do it. So he was so much of an influence to me that he wasn't even influencing me, if that makes any sense. So, but one of my favorite bands of all time, the Van Halen brothers, the album 5150 is really what got me on this journey of music in general. If there was, we talk about life-changing albums, life-changing moments. 5150 was it for me because I think I was 13, just turned 13 years old when that album came out. I was born in 73. I think it came out in late March of 86. And that was it. I know there's the Van Halen camps of, there's Dave, and then there's Sammy, and then you can throw Gary in there. But I like both bands. For me, it was always, from Sammy Hagar and on, because that's what I grew up with. 5150, OU812, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, Balance. Incredible music just for me. I got to see the band once with Sammy in 95 on the Balance tour up in Albany, New York. Collective Soul was the opening act. Again, Collective Soul, there's another band, right? 2 brothers. So, so you've got more family to kind of tie into this. But they were just incredible. And again, influencing me without influencing me so much, especially when Sammy joined the band. It was just another dynamic, another element that I just loved. So we've all got these bands that we love, all, that are tied to family one way or the other. I mean, you can make these family ties almost any way you like. But as far as musicians and the family, links to it, Van Halen was always my number one, always will be my number one. It's a shame they're not around anymore, even though Sammy and Michael Anthony are carrying that flag, what it looks like. Those were life-changing moments for me as far as music and family. And there's a lot more we'll talk about with family, I think, down the road, but this was just kind of a subject all on its own. I didn't, this was probably long enough of a podcast to listen to, but super important, this part of the family and knowing where you come from. If you have any thoughts on doing it, I suggest you do it sooner rather than later. And, pen to paper, write things down, put them in a folder, and see what you can find out. Maybe you can find things out that no one knew, and you can kind of be the one to tell everyone in the family. So I hope it works out for you. Again, I thank you for checking out this episode of the podcast episode, and the flip side with Richie Flip. We will see you on the next one. Later.